All right, Jeff, here we go, buddy. We're going to kick it off. We've got over 51 people on, which is fantastic. So good morning, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 29th. Thank you for registering for our Ask the Appraiser Zoom presentation here. 1 hour presentation. We have about 90 people registered. We are going to use Q&A for questions. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A, and Jeff, our esteemed speaker here, will monitor those questions, as will I. So today we have on the call Jeff Finley. Jeff, I'm going to give a little bit of background on you, but you may want to fill in the pieces. Jeff owns First Source Appraisal out of Mahwah, New Jersey. He also owns Valuation Services, LLC, which is a third-party appraisal management company that we have relied on for going on 6 years, Jeff. So thank you for being a partner over those 6 years. Lots going on in the mortgage space, a lot of purchases going above and beyond, many offers, lines of people out the doors when it comes to open houses. And of course, a big piece of the equation, Jeff, as you know, is what you and your team of appraisers do. So if you wouldn't mind taking it away. And folks, the majority of this presentation really is going to be questions and answers, things that you guys have along the way. But Jeff is going to give a little bit of a presentation and kind of open it up. So Jeff, take it away, buddy, and thank you so much for doing this.
That's good. Jay, thank you very much. You know, great to be working with you guys for the 6 years, and great to be here with everybody on the call. So I'll just get off a little bit of background about myself. As Jay said, I own a traditional appraisal company that I've had for about 20 years, been in the business about 25 years. Local appraisal company that's in New Jersey, New York, Connecticut. And then about 8 years ago, we started our national appraisal management company. We ended up being a regional player in the Northeast. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, we went fully national and operate in all 50 states plus DC at this point in time. Basically, like I said, I've been in the business myself 20 plus years. Started in the field as an appraiser, and then went ahead and gone and grown the business myself. So basically, just want to go ahead and give a bird's eye view of the appraisal process, the report, the sales grid, which is really the meaty part of the report, and then talk about the environment and answer questions. A lot of times when we have these types of seminars, there's always a number of questions of bad experiences, positive experiences, war stories with appraisers. So go easy on me. That's all I can ask. But either way, the appraisal. How does an appraiser come to his conclusion of value? There are 3 approaches to value. First, the main one, which everybody's seen and knows, is called the sales comparison approach. So basically what that is the appraiser takes the property, looks at similar sales that have transacted, tries to find the most similar sales, the most recent, and makes adjustments for differences between that sale and the subject property. They'll typically try to have 3 or 4 sales that they will provide that have been closed, and then they will also have 1 or 2 active pending listings to represent the current market. Once they adjust those sales for the differences, they'll have a range of adjusted values, and then they will go ahead and come to their conclusion of value based upon that range. That's called the sales comparison approach. The second approach is called the cost approach. More of a traditional approach, better if with new construction properties or complex commercial properties such as a church or a temple. But basically what they do is they look at the cost of the site to acquire the site, the cost to build the property, and then any sort of depreciation of value as time has passed since it was constructed. Antiquated approach, you're not going to see it in condos, you're not going to see it in co-ops, you will see it from time to time in a single family report or a multifamily report. And then finally, the third approach, which is a little bit more common in the residential space, but very common in the commercial space, is the income approach. How much income does the property produce, and just deriving a value based upon that income. More common with multifamily properties because typically some of the units are rented, and then definitely with commercial properties. Sometimes you'll see it added with a condo or a single family if it is tenant occupied. But again, it's the data for that with a residential 1 to 4 family home is not as robust as maybe a commercial property. So it's just not that big of a factor in determining value for a residential property. three main approaches: sales comparison, cost, income approach. I'm going to share my screen right now just so you can see the sales grid for the sales comparison approach and run through it very quickly. I know a lot of you have certainly looked and seen this before, but I just want to give you from an appraiser's perspective how it's determined and what we're looking at. So give me one quick second here. All right, so if anybody is having a problem seeing my screen, just let me know. This is the sales grid, okay? It's only showing comps 1 through 3. I assume you can see my mouse as I point to each comparable sale. Here's comparable sale 1, comparable sale 2, comparable sale 3. Sometimes appraisers will use up to 6 comps. Sometimes they may even use more. They have 3 per page. Typically, it starts from the top with the most important information all the way down to the bottom with the least value impacting information. And then there's some empty fields that they could fill in variable unique items such as an ADU, barn, whatever it may be. You have the property address, you'll have the distance to the subject, the sales price of that transaction. It will quantify a price per square foot. One thing just to touch on with everybody, I know in your space, the price per square foot is a big determining factor with listings and purchasing a home or whatnot. In the appraisal process, they do not look at price per square foot as an overall encompassing feature or valuation method. The reason being is in our sales grid, we pull out each individual feature, each individual factor, and value those comparatively separately, not as an overall encompassing price per square foot. And obviously, I'm sure you guys see it when you're out there. You might have a house with a huge acreage. You might have a house that's brand new construction. Like I said before, a barn, a pool, whatever it may be. And that overall price per square foot includes everything. So sometimes it's tough to compare apples to apples when you have different features. Anyway, so we'll run down from the price per square foot, the MLS listing, days on the market, verification source. Another important thing in the appraisal process, any data, comparable data that we're going to use, you're typically required to provide a verification source. So when you have a listing in the MLS, that's one source. And then all of a sudden you have the tax record verifying it. Good, you have your 2 sources. Sometimes, and I'm sure many of you may have come across this, you have a private transaction. So all of a sudden the appraiser is like, well, I can't use it. It's a private transaction. That's not necessarily true. It's kind of a cop out for some appraisers if they say it. But the big reason why it comes up is because now all of a sudden there's only one verification source, which is the tax records. There's no MLS. In this day and age, over the last 10 years, give or take, that we have, such a reliance on Zillow or Redfin, whatever it may be, you're now able to find a lot of information on there that you could use for your report if it is a private transaction. Okay, then we have the sales and financing and any concessions that are involved in the transaction. The appraiser is going to want to use arm's length transactions as comparable sales. Sometimes you'll have a bank-owned sale. This day and age, we don't have many short sales, knock on wood. You may have a private transaction between family members or an estate sale, but they want to try to shy away from anything that's non-arm's length because you want it to be a willing buyer, a willing seller with whatever sort of exposure, if need be, to the market. With that being said, if there are any concessions, that is an important factor, and it depends if it's common for the area, but typically you're going to see if there's a concession in the transaction, that being subtracted or deducted from the purchase price for the purpose of the appraisal process. Basically, if somebody bought a home for $350,000 and they're getting $50,000 back as a concession, the appraiser is going to wipe out that $50,000 and adjust that comp down because truthfully, only $300,000 was paid for that property. That's kind of the general rule of thumb that you'll see, and any expectations if you ever see concessions with comps. There are some areas where almost every property or transaction has a concession involved in it, and when they're that common, Sometimes an appraiser will not adjust for them, or sometimes they'll adjust at a fraction of what the concession was. It's really only if it's very common. As I move down, you'll see the location of the property. Obviously, you guys know this. The number one factor of value: location, location, and location. So this is where it'll be. Just so you understand the coding of the appraisal, about maybe 15 years ago, give or take, maybe 10 years ago, Fannie and Freddie implemented coding rather than just calling the location great, average, beautiful. They have specific codes that can be scrubbed into their algorithm, and therefore they can gain a lot of data on all of these properties and have a lot of consistency between reports. What that has turned into is, nowadays, if you or your clients have ever received an appraisal waiver, those appraisal waivers are generated from the data that they've collected over the years through appraisal reports because of these codings. So every time we complete an appraisal report and we send it, or the lender or Jay sends it to Fannie or Freddie, it's popped in the system, it's scrubbed through their algorithm, it has a lot of metrics that come up, it scores the appraisal, gives risk factors, and it stores all the data for that appraiser as well. And then over time, if the appraiser now uses a comp in a different report, but gives a different rating for the location, it will call out the appraiser. So it's a way of kind of policing the appraiser and making sure the appraisers are putting in quality and consistent work. And at the same time, it gives them that data to then go ahead down the road. If there's a low LTV property, a low risk property, and they have enough data for their algorithm to generate a value, it will allow an appraisal waiver. So just so you understand the coding, and not to veer too far off the topic, in the case of location, the N stands for neutral. Then the only other two factors up and down would be B for beneficial or A for adverse. So those are kind of the three tiers that you can rate a location. It doesn't mean that if you have two beneficial properties, you can't adjust for differences. You can adjust whenever you want. And we'll talk more about that with condition, which you'll see here. But it's just a way of coding for consistency. And then they have other factors like waterfront, golf course, whatever it may be for location. In this report, as you can see, it's neutral residential across the board. Forgive me, let me just go up one line. I didn't mention this. With the sales date and time field, it's telling you the contract date of July 22nd, and then it's telling you the sales date of August 22nd. So you always see the contract and sales date. Moving down, leaseholder fee simple. 99% of the time, you're going to have a fee simple property that really doesn't change. Site size, obviously that's self-explanatory. An appraiser will typically adjust for differences in site size. Now, one common thing that will come up, and just for you guys to understand, is just the bulk of the value of a site, of a lot size, is that first buildable lot. So whether it's a minimum lot size of 20 grand, of 20,000 square feet, or it's a legal non-conforming lot, which is common in our areas, that is smaller than the minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet, but maybe it's 10,000 square feet, it's still a legal buildable lot. So that chunk is a bulk of the lot value. Once you start getting into 22,000 square feet, 25,000 square feet, 27,000 square feet, it's called what's called surplus land. You can't subdivide it and build another house. It does provide a benefit to somebody who's looking to buy a house, but it's not at the same rate as a lot size, a buildable lot size. So if that 20,000 square foot lot of vacant land would sell for $200,000, which equates to, what is that? $200,000 by 20,000. Am I saying it right? $10 per square foot. 200,000 divided by 20. Yeah, $10 per square foot. It does not mean the surplus land, any additional land, would also be adjusted at $10 per square foot, because that's law of diminishing returns. Unless they could subdivide it, it's not valued as much. You can see here, there's minimal adjustments in this example. Honestly, this appraiser shouldn't have adjusted at all. Like when there's adjustments these small at $500 or $150, it's negligible on the overall value. You might as well not have adjusted. As we move down, neutral residential, design style, that's pretty self-explanatory. The coding for DT2 is detached 2-story. The next one you'll see is a Cape, it's DT 1.5, detached house, 1.5 stories. You know, sometimes you get into the urban areas, it's an attached property or semi-attached. A lot of times there won't be an adjustment for a difference in design or style, but the appraiser will try to select homes that are of similar style. And you can see here that the appraiser has 2 colonials and 1 Cape. Quality of construction and condition. I'm going to talk about these in the same breath. Although quality of construction, you know, obviously we're talking high-end appliances, molding, high-end finishes, whatever there may be. And condition, obviously, there's, you know, brand new construction all the way down to uninhabitable. They rank these on a scale of 1 to 6. So a C1 for condition, all the condition ratings start with a C, all the quality of construction ratings start with a Q. A C1 is brand new construction never lived in. And then it goes down to C6, which is, you know, uninhabitable, destroyed property. The bulk of your comps or your homes that you're going to see are probably going to fall within C3 and C4. A C3 home is usually a very good, clean, you know, renovated in the last 10 to 15 years home. And then a C4 is just a very, you know, clean property, but just dated inside, hasn't been touched in 20, 25 years. But you know, there's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to it. Fannie and Freddie put out these ratings to kind of make them absolute rather than relative to each other. And sometimes you'll have a difference of opinion from an appraiser. As far as quality of construction, same thing. Q1 is your top-notch quality, and Q6 is your bare bones minimum builder grade, if you want to call it that. Because it's typically difficult to distinguish between 6 categories of quality of construction. You're again mostly going to see Q3s to Q4s depending on the area. Obviously, sometimes you'll find high-end multi-million-dollar homes, and you know that Q rating will go up. You will not typically see adjustments often because typically the comps selected are of a similar quality of construction. Anyhow, as I move forward, age. That's pretty self-explanatory. Appraisers will often adjust for the age of the home. Sometimes, you know, in a case like this, 98 years versus 120 versus 97 versus 123, I'm sure their effective ages are pretty much the same, and an adjustment for age may not be so warranted when you're talking about these older homes and not such a difference in years. Condition is a big one. Obviously, you want to be fair, and the appraiser wants to account for differences in condition, whether there's an upgraded bathroom, renovated kitchen. In the case of Comp 1 that you can see, there are 2 C3 condition ratings, but the appraiser is still adjusting 10 grand in favor of the subject. Anytime you see a plus with an adjustment, that's bringing the comp price up in favor of the subject because of the subject's superior feature. So that's why he's basically saying that Comp 1 is somewhat inferior in condition, but yet still C3, and therefore adding an adjustment for that.
Hey, Jeff, can you do me a quick favor? Can
Yes.
you just restate that for everybody one more time, that adding 10 grand to Comp 1 helps the subject? Can you just explain that one more time?
Yep. So with this grid, remember the premise behind this grid is to take comps that are your best comps in the market. You know, nothing is a perfect comp. You're trying to take what the best comps are, and then you're adjusting for differences, not every single difference, but the differences that the market will pay a premium for or whatnot. And for example, in this one, it's a little tougher to see with the C3 versus C3, but on Comp 2 with the C4 versus C3, it's a little easier to see or explain. So Comp 2 is an inferior condition, right? It's C4 condition. The subject, which you can see here, is C3 condition. and the appraiser's adjusting $20,000 to this sales price of comp 3 because, or excuse me, comp 2, because comp 2 is inferior in condition. So anytime there's a feature that's inferior to the subject, that should be a plus adjustment in favor of the subject. And then anytime the comp has something better than the subject, it's going to be a negative adjustment. So as you move down in comp 2, you'll see, bedroom, bathroom counts. This 2,500 is for the difference in bathroom count. The comp has 1.1 bathrooms, which is 1.5 baths. The subject has 2.0 baths, which is 2 bathrooms. So that's why there's a positive adjustment, because the subject has an extra half bath. But you'll see in the square footage, the subject's is 1,781 square feet, and comp 2 is larger at 2,275 square feet. So therefore now, because that comp is bigger, the appraiser is adjusting it lower, saying, hey, we got to take some value out of that sales price because this is a larger home. Finally, as we move lower, things that still contribute value, but a little easier to quantify. Basements. These are code words for the basement. Usually it says how many square feet the basement is. So for this comp, it's 910 square feet. The 0 SF means 0 square foot finished. So it's an unfinished basement. And then the WU stands for walkout. So if we look at the subject, it's 870 square foot basement, 0 finished, none of it's finished, and it's a walkout as well. Where you'll see a finished basement is in comp 1, 1140 square feet, 900 square feet of it is finished. It is also a walk up basement. And then these are the room count codings. And again, these codings are for it's the UAD and delivery to Fannie and Freddie and understanding what the comp or the subject has. I'll run through it real quick. The 1RR stands for 1 rec room. There is 0 bedrooms, BR. There is 0.1 bathrooms. The BA stands for bathrooms, and then 0 other rooms. So because this comp has a finished basement, the appraiser's taking away value for it being finished and then taking away value for the bathroom in the basement. As we go down, functional utility. This field can be used for a variety of things, but often you'll see the bedroom count be something that is quantified here. This appraiser is basically saying anything between a 3 and a 4 bedroom are considered similar and no adjustments needed. So no adjustments there. Heating and cooling, that's obviously self-explanatory. Everything has hot water, heat, no air conditioning. Energy efficient items. If you ever have solar panels, geothermal, this is where you would see that. All of these comps don't have anything. Garage or carport. Again, coding for the UAD. Subject doesn't have a garage. Comp 1 has 1 GA, stands for 1 garage attached. You can see comp 2, it says 2 GD. That's for 2 garages detached. And then the 2 DW is 2-car driveway, 4-car driveway. Comp 3 has 2-car garage detached and a 4-car driveway. And then finally, the last line that's boilerplate is for porch patios or decks. And depending on what a comp has and how nice it is, you'll see adjustments in this feature. And finally, like I said, there's rooms for the others that you can see. With the comp and the subject here, there are no others. You guys are seeing. And then also the amount of adjustments. They'll look at the gross adjustments, not the net adjustments, the gross adjustments. You could have a comp that has $100,000 in positive adjustments and $100,000 in negative adjustments, which would equate to 0 net adjustments. But that comp could be a terrible comp because there's so many adjustments. So gross adjustments, which is the bottom, is really a key factor on seeing which sale is most comparable to the subject. So if this were my report and I have comp 3 that is closest to the property within a half mile, most recent sale, and least amount of gross adjustments, that's going to be where I more heavily weight my process and come to my value. It doesn't mean the appraiser is going to come at 378, but the appraiser may come in at 370, which is higher than these two, or 375. Not one sale gives all value. You never know what the motivations were behind some of these things, but that's typically how an appraiser in the sales comparison approach will conclude their value. Finally,
hey Jeff.
Go ahead, buddy.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, then finally, they will conclude their value for the sales comparison approach. If they've completed the cost approach or the income approach, they may give some weight to either of those approaches. But in the residential process, typically it's all the sales comparison approach. And even though they may complete the cost approach or the income approach, it will not be given weight. So that's why almost all the time, you'll see a value that is the final estimate of value that equals the sales comparison approach value. So, go ahead, Jay, what do you got?
So Jeff, there's always a bracketing system used, right? Finding higher comps and lower comps and coming to a valuation on that property. What if you can't find comps higher, comps lower than the subject?
Yep. I mean, listen, like everything else, it's about the supply of data that's out there, especially when we're dealing with a market like this, where there's not a lot of inventory, not a lot of transactions. We just went through a, rough winter. You're trying to use what's best, and not everything is perfect for an underwriter where, hey, we want to comp with a larger lot size, or, hey, we want to comp with like in the case of the one, we're looking at here, all the comps have a larger lot size. So, we can't force something to check off all the boxes, and the appraiser will just notate that in the report and say, listen, there's no true comparable properties that have a smaller lot size. In this day and age, lenders are typically, or the underwriters are typically okay with it as long as it's explained. But sometimes, it depends how close. If we only had a 6,000 square foot lot and we're using half-acre lots, all right, now we're getting a little bit away from it. If we had a 1,700 square foot home and all of a sudden the appraiser is using 3,000 square foot homes, that's where the problems arise. But in a case like this, you could see they basically have the square footage bracketed. Most of the items here, with the exception of a garage, an underwriter looking at this one, the subject doesn't have a garage, subject has a smaller lot size, they may be a little bit concerned that these are features the market would look for, and maybe there's a marketability issue. What you see happen if we can't provide comps like that is underwriter come back for additional commentary, and the appraiser adds commentary to it.
Cool. Hey, Jeff, you mentioned quite a bit data collection on behalf of Fannie Mae. Yep. You also went into condition. One of the things that can come up, albeit it happens very infrequently, is the CU review by Fannie Mae, the collateral underwriter review score that they come up with. And even though an appraisal may be fine in the eyes of the appraiser, Fannie Mae can come back and, I don't know if I would say disqualify, but have their findings on that report. Can you just enlighten everybody on how that works?
Yeah,
please?
Absolutely. So again, all this data, which was called the UAD, the coding, every single appraisal for the last 15, however many years, has been going into their system. And obviously their algorithm blows the doors off of Zillow and everything else that we'll get online. So they put a high reliance on that data. And what'll happen is, once we take a report and we review it and we deliver it to Jay and Cross Country Mortgage, it'll go right through what's called the UCDP. That's if it's going to Fannie or Freddie. And that'll scrub everything. It'll try to pull from its data what it believes are the top 20 comps in the area. It'll see if the appraiser's using some of those highest rated comps. It will compare the appraiser's rankings of the subject and the comps to what other appraisers have used for those same properties. So let's just say comp 3 has been used 10 times in other appraisal reports. It'll look and make sure that everybody has called it C3 condition. If all of the other appraisers called it a C4 and this appraiser called it a C3, it's going to call the appraiser out and it will drop the score of that appraisal. if the appraiser used this, and it'll also review all of the prior appraisals from that particular appraiser and see how many times he's used each comp, and then compare the data. If the appraiser has discrepancy in data, it will call out that appraiser. It will reduce the score of the appraisal. And then the score of the appraisal that it will give, and it's called a risk score. It's not necessarily called a quality score, but it's called a risk score. One being the worst, one being the best, low risk, 5 being the worst, high risk. It will rate the appraisal, and then, depending on the rating, the lender may come back to look for a comp to be added, explanation, a correction of a condition rating, whatever there may be. I believe if, Jay, you probably know this better than me, I believe if it's a rating of 3.5 or lower, there's no risk of a buyback on that particular loan. I could be wrong. That's outside of my scope. But it will also, depending on the comps, because it will evaluate the adjustments as well, saying, hey, this appraiser is only adjusting $20 per square foot. But in this area, typical adjustment should be $50 per square foot. It will call out appraisers if they're, using traditional negligible. I would guarantee you on this one, we were speaking before about the lot size adjustment. I would guarantee you that there would be some sort of comment or much larger adjustment for the differences in lot size, versus like comp 2 is almost twice the size, 40%, 80% larger than the subject, and yet the appraiser is only adjusting $500, so that would be something the algorithm would call out. Even though that may come back with a poor risk score, the lender can come back to the appraiser can look at the report, add a comp or two, and every time we deliver that report back, the risk score can change. So it's not a one score, is stuck with that appraisal. It can change as the appraisal is modified. Sorry, Jay, I didn't know if.
No, that is great. I'm going to go to the Q&A, Jeff, and ask some questions here.
Yep.
Someone asked, how is the square footage adjustment calculated?
Okay, great question, because that's probably one of the first things that'll come up if there's ever a value issue on an appraisal. Now, again, keep in mind, and I still have my screen shared with you guys, right? Yep. Keep in mind that these overall price per square foot of the comps, the 180, 160, 240, let's just say for easy math, it averages out to 185, 190. Now, we wouldn't adjust the differences in square footage for the 185 price per square foot because we are pulling out a bunch of different features that go into this overall $185 per square foot calculation. So because you're pulling out all these different features, and you guys know as well, the lot size, the land value may be 30 to 50% of the overall value. So therefore, take away $90 of the $185 per square foot number. Now we're with just one feature, we're dropped down in half, basically. So the appraiser, it's at the appraiser's discretion, quote unquote, with any adjustment, it should be what the market shows. With a single family property, generally you'll see the GLA adjustment, the size adjustment, come in around maybe a quarter of the overall price per square foot of the comps. And it really should be relative to the overall price per square foot of the comps, because those are the types of home that are most comparable to the subject. If you're doing a waterfront condo, in Manhattan, those are selling for, $3,000 per square foot or whatever it may be. You're not going to use a $50 per square foot GLA adjustment. It has to be relative to your comps. And the other thing is a single family versus you don't have that land lot size that you're dealing with. So the square footage is a lot more, more valuable than it would be in a single family home. So that percentage may go up to 30% of the overall price per square foot, just kind of as a general rule of thumb. There were, prior to the UAD and these, the algorithm of Fannie and Freddie, you would often see appraisers use very small GLA adjustments or very small lot size adjustments. And ever since the data has been coming back from Fannie and Freddie with their algorithm, they've gotten better, and they've warranted and displayed that larger adjustments were necessary. But just to answer your question there.
Jeff, talk about solar and geothermal, because that's coming up a few times here in the chat and the Q&A.
Yep,
how
I'm
that
gonna
affects value.
stop this screen share just for you guys as well. All right, solar, traditional or non-traditional energy sources. Solar's a big one. Obviously, it's coming more into play over the more recent years. It's kind of a catch-22 because it's a big buyer preference. Although it can save you a lot of money, at the same time, the maintenance or replacing parts or even the aesthetics, some people don't want to see solar panels on their home. So it's really tough to quantify if it's a positive benefit and how much of a positive benefit in the appraisal process. Obviously, they do have to be owned versus leased. That's a big kicker. You cannot give value to something that's leased. So, that kind of chops it out right away. And then if you have something that's owned, it comes down to, hey, does somebody want this? Is it common for the area? Do you have comps with it? Ideally, there would be other comps in the area with it that would show they're selling for a higher price because there's more of a demand for the cost savings. But that's a tough one, and I know it pretty much goes for a lot of them, including geothermal. It really comes down to what the comps have. Sometimes, practically speaking, you and I might talk and say, all right, a pool is great. It costs $100,000 to put in a pool. Obviously there should be some sort of value given to it. But if the market's not really showing, and if there's sales with, identical homes, one has a pool, one doesn't have a pool, and they trade for the same price, the market's kind of telling the appraiser that there's really no added value that's supported for a pool. Now, I'm using that as an example. A pool is typically easier to adjust for, and the market does show that there's value for it, even though that is also a buyer preference, but more people typically prefer a pool than maybe solar panels. A pool is a little bit easier to digest as compared to solar panels, where not many comps may have it, and some people may be turned off by it.
Jeff, central air, buddy. One question about central air and how is central air adjusted for?
Yep. So central air is a little easier, almost like a half bath. There's definitely an added value there. Now, how do we quantify it? The quantifying of an adjustment in the appraisal process is very difficult. We all wish it was simpler. The primary method is what's called the paired sales analysis. And in thinking of it, it makes sense, but in actual using it, it's very tough. So paired sales analysis is basically you have two identical homes next to each other. Let's use the example we were talking about just earlier. Two identical homes, one has a pool, one doesn't have a pool. Well, if they basically both sold around the same time, you would say that the difference in price is what that pool is worth to a buyer. So even though the pool may cost 100 grand, if those two homes sold and one with the pool sold for $25,000 more, that is the appraiser's adjustment of what they would utilize for a pool in their entire appraisal report for that area. And that is called paired sales. You're using two sales, you're pairing them together, and you're trying to find the differences. The less differences, the better, because you could focus on a specific feature of a property. Now, in reality, that's next to impossible. We don't live in Florida where everything is PUDs and identical with the exception of a couple of little things. Up here, there's so many variables that go into it. So the other alternatives for figuring out adjustments are cost and depreciation, which again, in the pool situation, it's really not that practical. $100,000 or $100,000 for a house just because it has a pool. Air conditioning is a little bit easier to adjust that way because, hey, this house doesn't have air conditioning. This one does. If this house wants air conditioning, it's going to cost, X, Y, Z. So typically, and the other thing with that is with paired sales, there are a lot of homes that do have air conditioning and maybe some that don't. So you're able to kind of utilize the paired sales in combination with cost. And then finally, what they'll also utilize, the other last two ones would be a regression analysis, which is what Fannie and Freddie use with their algorithms. Unfortunately, the appraiser doesn't have an abundance of data like Fannie and Freddie, so that's not a great tool for the appraiser for determining adjustments. And then speaking to realtors, you guys are really a great resource for the appraiser. And sometimes, hey, listen, the subject doesn't have air conditioning. All my comps have air conditioning. What are you typically seeing in the market with your buyers? How much they would, be willing to pay up for something like that? Or again, even a pool. Like that's where you'll typically get some good information as feedback from realtors who have boots on the ground and are seeing it and talking to potential buyers.
Jeff, you segued right into our, sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. I was talking about the air conditioning adjustment. I answered it. So go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
Yeah, so you segued into a good question is, do the appraisers want or do they expect the listing agent or the buyer's agent to supply comps upon inspection?
Yep. So this is always a big part of what I talk about when I get on, you get in front of realtors. So obviously, if you guys are here, you probably want to pay attention to this one. I would always encourage you, whether you're the listing agent or the buyer's agent, to go to the inspection or try to be as communicative to the appraiser about the home, about the features of the home, give them comps, support your purchase price, especially nowadays with everything going over ask. You guys are going to be fighting an uphill battle, and you want to, be welcoming to the appraiser. It's obviously, understand this on the appraiser side. They're getting paid anywhere from $300 to $500 for this one appraisal. They're probably in a normal environment doing anywhere from 5 to 10 of these a week. So it's economically, it's a numbers game for them, right? They want to get in the house, get out the house, get what they need, get the report in, and try to get as many done as they can so they can have, a larger income. Obviously, with the lending side, maybe there's not as many transactions as an appraiser. With obviously you guys on the realtor side, each transaction is a huge chunk of your income. So it's a very, important to you guys. So I would always encourage to give your best effort to not only sell the property to the buyers, sellers, but sell it to the appraiser as well. Now, the appraisers can be a unique cast of characters. I'm sure you guys have all come across different, personalities. Many of them are one-man shops working on their own, driving around on their own, and some of them are grumpy. You may show up with a smile on your face and, ready and prepared to give them 6 comps and explain everything about the home. And that person may take those comps and throw them right in the garbage and be a jerk to you. Even if that's the case, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5 times, you're going to get an appraiser who is professional, who goes out there and, takes the information you gave to them, is reading body language, is speaking to you, is, now all of a sudden having a conversation and you guys have a common interest. When they get in their car, they kind of forget about things and move to the next property. But when they get home and go to write up that report, they're probably going to be tired. They're going to be sitting at their computer at night or in the morning, and they're going to start to do their research. And then they're going to look next to them. They're going to have a folder of 6 comps that a realtor, a nice person who they had a great conversation with, gave them. And they're going to take a look at that. They're going to open it. And then they may be weighing between what they're seeing on the MLS and what you told them about the property or what you gave them as a comp. And that might swing them over to this comp that sold at a higher price because the other one, whatever, wasn't as good. I would always, and if you can't go, obviously you guys are busy too, and, going to all these inspections can be difficult. I would make sure maybe one of your assistants go, or you get the appraiser's information and you email them what you have, try to speak to them over the phone, try to, send them whatever points there are in the email. And even when you're trying to prove a value or prove that this home is worth $500,000, you also want to be aware of what maybe shows a different picture, because if that appraiser pulls up all the sales on the subject street and there's one right next door that sold for 350,000 6 months ago, you could bet they're going to look at it. So don't just provide all the comps that sold for 500,000. You can explain, hey, you're going to see this comp that sold for 350, but it was a divorce situation. They had a house in Florida. They had to get away real quick. You can even verify it with the listing agent. And now all of a sudden the appraiser can state that in the report. It doesn't have any, influence, and it works out the best way it can. As much, and I'm not trying to sell, obviously this is my business and my livelihood. I'm not trying to sell any appraiser short at all, but you guys are the ones that are in all these properties. The appraisers typically looking at MLS photos, and obviously the MLS photos can always show a house looks super nice, but you guys know the differences of, hey, the kitchen was, really small. It wasn't, an open concept, or, the backyard was a slope backyard. It wasn't, it really had no backyard. Those little things are always super helpful. So I would always advise you guys, and again, don't take offense with the appraiser if some of them are jerks and whatnot. It's going to be in your best interest to give it the best shot to try to provide as much data as you can.
Jeff, yeah, and I'm going to piggyback on that real quick. It's going to be harder to do a reconsideration of value after the fact if they didn't know that on the front end. So to Jeff's point, if there's a private sale that's potentially going to bring it down and we can get ahead of it before the appraisal is done, let's get ahead of it before the appraisal is done. That's what I'm taking away, Jeff, from that.
Absolutely. And here's the other kicker too. This is a good one. And this is very important in this environment. All right, we're going through another wave of prices increasing because there's no inventory and there's everybody chasing the minimal amount of properties that are there. You guys may have missed out on a couple of similar properties that are now under contract. Definitely explain to the appraiser the under contracts and say, hey, listen, we bid up 50 grand and they took something even higher. All of that's good information. The appraiser does have to use closed sales, but under contracts are very helpful. More importantly, if one of these under contract sales are closing soon, you can hold off the inspection until the day of that closing of the comp or the next day after, so that now the appraiser can use that as a closed sale. Really key in this environment. Jay and I have dealt with some of these things over the years. It can save you a deal. It can save you a bunch of time. Having that recent closed comp that now shows the current market is a home run for the appraiser. And the appraiser has to use data as of their inspection date. So even if it closed the next day, technically it can't be used as closed in the appraisal report. So always think of that, especially in this environment where, prices are moving and you're trying to prove something.
Cool. Thank you, Jeff. Hey, Jeff, one of the realtors posted that one of the big banks recently sent out a data collector instead of an appraiser. Do you know what that's all about?
Great question. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. So you guys are going to start to see, and you actually did during the pandemic, and now this is kind of Fannie's direction that they're going in, is what's called, they call it appraisal modernization. Basically, they're calling everything that we do in the appraisal world, dinosaurs, and they're trying to get up to speed and use technology. So there's two things. There's a desktop appraisal where we dealt with a lot of these during the pandemic, where nobody went to the property at all, and the appraiser did everything from their desk. It was typically a purchase. They had all the information on the MLS, and Fannie and Freddie felt comfortable with it. Now, Fannie and Freddie's version of that is have the same desktop appraisal, but they need a floor plan. So now they're saying, all right, you can do it from your desktop, but somebody has to go to the property and get a floor plan. It's a little weird because if you're sending somebody to the property, just send the appraiser to the property and have them do the appraisal. Why are we going to send this data collector to the property? Well, their direction with it is, we were talking about appraisal waivers just earlier, what they're doing now, so they could still get the data for their algorithm and their machine. If they're going to issue appraisal waiver, they want to send a property data collector to the property at a cheaper price, at much faster, come back, have the data available for their machine or whatnot, and then they can issue an appraisal waiver based on that, or they feel that somebody's been in the property, there's nothing wrong with it, and they issue the appraisal waiver. So that's where you're going to start to see more and more, rather than the appraiser showing up, what's called a property data collector. What will happen is if they get the property data information and they say, wait a second, we're not issuing the appraisal waiver based upon that, then they will take that information, hand it off to an appraiser, and he will write up an appraisal report. He or she will write up an appraisal report based on that information and not having to go back out to the house a second time. And that's called a hybrid appraisal, because you have one person doing the inspection piece and then you have the appraiser writing up the appraisal piece. So just to be aware of that, you're probably going to start to see more and more of these property data collectors out there getting information. That's why they're typically either realtors, home inspectors. Sometimes they will be an appraiser. But to answer your question.
So does that mean a property with a property inspection waiver could end up needing a full appraisal for some of these lenders?
It could. Again, it's a little bit out of my scope, but yes, typically, they're going to require this, what's called a PDR, property data report. Send somebody out there, quick, cheap, get it back, either issue the appraisal waiver and you guys are good, or hey, something came up, we don't like it, we want an appraiser to finish this report and put a value on it. Obviously, Jay, it, with the appraisal waiver and even with this property data report, there's no value. There's no anything about value that's being stated. It's all with their algorithm and where it quantifies there. But as soon as they put it in an appraiser's hands to write up the report, now there's a value on it. Now, you can have other things that come into play.
Cool. 3 more questions and we're rolling up on 10 o'clock here. This one's a technical one. How can we understand the ANSI measuring for GLA?
Man, you guys are coming through with awesome questions. You're hitting all the points. ANSI is very, very difficult. And honestly, it all ties into what Fannie and Freddie is doing with this modernization. Just to go into it real quick, when you guys do see the property data collectors out there, nowadays, everybody's using the scanning technology on their phone. It's awesome. And if you guys haven't used it yet, I would check it out. It's called like QB Casa is one. You can literally walk around the home. Astroom's another one that you guys may have heard. Walk around the home for 5 minutes, scan it with your phone. It'll put in a 3D dollhouse. It'll have the best sketch I've ever seen being an appraiser out or whatnot. But they're using that data, obviously to have a common measuring feature with all of the technology. So that's where ANSI comes into play. They're using ANSI so that all these technology companies are consistent with how they measure. Now, where it kills everybody or the appraisers is when you have a Cape Cod or dormer, style roofs, or even worse is bi-levels or split levels. So the thing with ANSI is if any part of a level is below grade, that whole level is supposed to be reported in the basement line item. Doesn't mean it's supposed to be valued as a basement. It's just supposed to be reported in a different section of the sales grid that we looked at before. It becomes very difficult with bi-levels. You think a bi-level is 2,000 square feet. All of a sudden, the appraisal report shows 1,000 square feet above grade, 1,000 square feet in the basement, and everybody starts getting up in arms. But again, the appraiser, it's only supposed to be a reporting difference. And if the appraiser is using it compared to other bi-level comps, they should be doing the same thing for the other bi-level comps. So you should be having an apples to apples comparison. What I've been telling realtors is just be prepared in the event you do have a bi-level or a Cape Cod that this may come into play. And again, the appraiser shouldn't be deducting any value. They should just be reporting it differently in the sales grid. And really quick with the top floor, it's half of the floor has to be, half the floor has to be 7 feet or higher for it to be counted in the GLA. And then the appraiser can only count the areas that are 5 feet or higher if that floor has half of the floor 7 feet or higher. It's a little bit of a caveat. You're not seeing too many problems with it because there's some wiggle room, if you want to call it that. The ones you're seeing problems with are the rooms below grade.
Cool. Jeff, I'm going to give you a second to catch your breath and grab a sip of water or something. I'm going to answer the next question. How can we find out the risk score with Fannie Mae? any lender is doing the collateral assessment behind the scenes through Fannie Mae's system. We as a lender are submitting directly to Fannie Mae. They're scoring it. The score never even makes it back to us necessarily or to you unless there's an issue with it. So we run through the model, score it, and if there's no issue, we just move on to the next appraisal. Okay, so you really won't know that one. Jeff, another question. How much weight, if any, do appraisers give when a property received 10 offers over asking? Now that we're seeing comps that went under contract in the winter finally closed, asking about the current market conditions have us accepting offers way over again. And I think you touched upon this, but.
Yep, it's tough, right? It's very tough because the appraiser is almost like a lagging indicator. We use sales that are closed. So if it's taking 2 months for properties to close, we're playing catch up. The best way that an appraiser can quantify it or try to indicate the current market is showing that values are increasing with whatever data that there may be. So if you're bringing comps to an appraiser, also, I would say bring data from the MLS or wherever you get it that is showing values increasing. And then the appraiser should be adjusting. If you remember on the sales grid, the date, the contract date and the sales date field, they should be adjusting comps for values increasing. So it's an adjustment that has to be well supported, but that's how the appraiser will quantify if values are moving up. A good thing that can also help is if we know 123 Main Street is under contract for well over list price, but the appraiser only sees the list price on the MLS listing. But if you know or you're able to get the actual contract price from that realtor, the appraiser can use that in the report if they have data that shows it. And now it can help indicate, that again, values are going above ask and values are increasing. But, it goes back to trying to wait for comps to close if you have that freedom. Obviously, in cases like that, I would be careful if you get cornered into waiving your appraisal contingency. It's a lot of times we'll see something's offered for 500,000, it goes for 550, and the data is just not there to support 550, but the appraiser may get to 530, 540. It really just depends on the area and the data. But either way, I know sellers are trying to waive all the appraisal contingencies and put all the risks on the buyer, but just be prepared in cases if you don't see the data supporting it.
Jeff, 2 more questions, then we'll wrap it up. What would make a location A for adverse, question mark?
Yep. So with the ratings for views and location, A stands for adverse, obviously negative location, N for neutral, B for beneficial, good. So something that would make a location adverse: busy road, corner on the busy road, gas station across the street, commercial property across the street. Those are the types of things that would be considered adverse. Maybe a cemetery, in the backyard, whatever. And then obviously beneficial: waterfront property, cul-de-sac is a big one for being beneficial. So hopefully that answers your question.
Cool, thank you. And last question, can you chat about finished versus unfinished basement, and also permits and non-pulled permits for basement?
Yep. So
I think you should probably just comment. I think you probably should comment on permits just generally too.
Yeah. Yep. So basements, finished versus unfinished. Again, it's the appraiser's trying to pull the data from the market to see what it's worth, not what really it costs to put in. But typically what you'll see is if the appraiser's adjusting $50 per square foot for the above grade GLA, then maybe a fraction of that for the finished area of the basement. So, maybe they'll use $40 per square foot instead of 50 because it's below grade, not above grade, but can be lived in and occupied. As far as permits, yes, obviously that's come into play a lot. Here's kind of the general rule of thumb is unless it's something, and this is most appraisers, I would say each appraiser is different, unless it's like a second kitchen or a second living quarters, typically the appraiser's not searching for permits on everything. So let's just say somebody finished their basement and didn't take out permits for it. An appraiser is typically not going into the building department to say, hey, this house has a renovated bathroom, renovated kitchen, and a finished basement. I want to make sure they pull permits for that. That's not usually where it comes into play. Where it does come into play sometimes is if it's, a single family zone and, no in-law suites are allowed, and yet there's a second kitchen in the basement, or, there's an apartment in the basement and there's a lock on the door. Well, that all of a sudden now becomes a legal use situation, and it also becomes a valuation situation. So the appraiser typically needs to know, is this allowed and can I value it, or is this not allowed and they have to, quote unquote, remove the stove to now take away that illegal use. So what I would advise you guys is, if you're listing a property, or even if you're on the buy side and that they did something that wasn't necessarily to code to the town or put in legally, let's just say they finished off the area above the garage and their son lives up there in an apartment, you might want to be a little proactive. And the best thing I've seen in cases of a second kitchen is, hey, just get the stove out of there, get the fridge out of there before the appraiser comes in, and now it's a wet bar, and all of a sudden a call to the town really doesn't need to be made, and it's smooth. It goes by a lot smoother. So it's kind of coming to knowing your property and knowing what might get called out by the appraiser.
Cool, Jeff. That is it, buddy. Thank you very, very much. Solid hour. For all of our partners that are on, whether you work with myself or one of our other loan officers within any of our branches across the country, we really appreciate your partnership. And Jeff, of course, we appreciate your partnership as well. Sometimes it's a thankless business on the appraisal side. I'm sure you take a lot more complaints and compliments every day, but we really appreciate this education, and we will probably have you do this again. So thank you so much for your time, Jeff. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for being on. Have a great day.
Thanks,